A man once won $16.2 million in the Pennsylvania lottery, and within 2 weeks of cashing his first check, he had already spent more than $300,000 of it. Not on a house, not on his kids' college funds, on a liquor license, a Florida restaurant lease, a used car lot, and a twin-engine airplane he had no license to fly. His name was William Post III, but everyone called him Bud. And by the time he died in 2006, he was surviving on food stamps and a $450 a month stipend, more than $1 million in debt, with a story so dark it included a hitman, a lawsuit from his own landlady, and a brother who tried to have him killed. This is the story of how the second largest jackpot in Pennsylvania history at the time destroyed the life of the man who won it, and more importantly, why almost everything Bud Post did wrong is something ordinary people do every single day with much smaller windfalls: a tax refund, an inheritance, a bonus, a pay raise. The mechanics are the same, the only difference is the scale. It was 1988, and Bud Post was 49 years old. He was working as a cook and a truck driver scraping by, the kind of guy who lived check to check and dreamed bigger than his paycheck allowed. When the Pennsylvania lottery drawing happened, the full jackpot was more than $32 million, the second highest the state had ever produced. Half of that money went to a group of 16 employees at the Westinghouse Betty's Atomic Power Laboratory in Pittsburgh, engineers and technicians who had pooled their money on a single ticket. The other half, $16.2 million, belonged to Bud. The structure of the prize matters, because Bud didn't get a $16 million check. He got an annuity, 26 annual payments of $497,953.47, just under $500,000 a year, every year, for the next 2.5 decades. To anyone with even basic financial discipline, this was a guaranteed life of comfort. Pay off any debts, buy a reasonable home, invest the rest, and you have generational wealth. The annuity structure was, in many ways, a protection against exactly the kind of person Bud turned out to be. It didn't protect him. The first check arrived. Within 14 days, Bud had blown through more than $300,000. He bought that liquor license. He leased a restaurant in Florida that he had no experience running. He purchased a used car lot, again with no experience. And then, in what may be the single most absurd purchase in the history of lottery winners, he bought a twin-engine airplane. Bud Post did not have a pilot's license. He could not fly the plane. He bought it anyway. 3 months into being a millionaire, Bud Post was $500,000 in debt. Read that again. 3 months. $500,000 in the hole. He was earning roughly $500,000 a year for the next 25 years, and he had already managed to spend more than that annual payment and borrow against future ones. The next year, he bought a mansion in Oil City, Pennsylvania for $395,000. Now, in 1989, $395,000 for a mansion in Oil City was a serious house. This was not a modest upgrade. This was a statement, and the statement was that Bud Post had no intention of living within the boundaries of his annual payment. The money attracted people. It always does. Bud had a landlady and occasional girlfriend named Ann Carpick. According to her, before the winning ticket was ever purchased, the two of them had an agreement that any lottery winnings would be split. She sued. The case dragged on for 3 years, and in the end a judge ruled in her favour, ordering that Anne Carpick was entitled to 1/3 of Bud Post's lottery proceeds. 1/3 gone, just like that. But the lawsuit, as devastating as it was, wasn't the worst thing that happened to Bud because of his winnings. The worst thing came from inside his own family. His brother, consumed by jealousy and greed, hired a hitman. The plan was to have Bud and his sixth wife murdered so that the brother could inherit the remaining lottery payments. The attempt failed. The brother was arrested, and Bud Post, sitting in his Oil City mansion surrounded by lawsuits and debt, and a family member who had literally tried to have him killed, had to confront the reality that the money he thought would solve every problem in his life had become the source of every problem in his life. Let's pause here and take stock of where we are in this story, because what comes next is the slow, grinding collapse. And it's the part most people get wrong when they imagine what happens to lottery winners. The shocking spending, the lawsuits, the violence, those are the headlines. But the real lesson is in what came after. The long, quiet years of trying and failing to dig out from a hole that Bud kept digging deeper. And the question we have to ask is this: with nearly $500,000 a year still flowing in, how does a man end up on food stamps? Here's how. The annuity payments kept coming, but they were never enough to cover the debts Bud kept accumulating. Failed business after failed business. The restaurant in Florida didn't work. The used car lot didn't work. Every venture he touched lost money, partly because he had no business experience, partly because he was making decisions emotionally rather than analytically, and partly because, once you're known as a lottery winner, every supplier, every contractor, every employee assumes you can absorb mistakes that would bankrupt a normal owner. He sold off future annuity payments at a steep discount to get lump sums of cash. This is one of the most destructive financial decisions any annuity holder can make. When you sell future payments, you typically receive somewhere between 40 and 60 cents on the dollar. Bud did this repeatedly to cover debts and fund new ventures, which meant he was effectively converting hundreds of thousands of dollars in future income into much smaller present payments, which he would then spend, which would force him to sell more future payments, which would shrink his future income even further. It is the financial equivalent of bleeding yourself to cure anemia. By the time the dust settled, Bud Post had more than $1 million in debt and no meaningful income left from the lottery. The mansion was gone, the businesses were gone, the wives, all 6 of them, were gone. He spent time in jail after firing a gun over the head of a bill collector. He told reporters in his later years that he wished he had never won. He called the lottery a nightmare. In the last years of his life, William Bud Post III lived on food stamps and a $450 a month stipend. $450. A man who had been guaranteed nearly $500,000 a year for 26 years was now living on less than $5,500 a year. He died of respiratory failure on January 15, 2006. He was 66 years old. So, what do we actually take from this? Not the obvious stuff about lottery winners being doomed, because that's both lazy and statistically untrue. Plenty of lottery winners hold on to their money. The real lessons are about how anyone, with any amount of sudden money, can avoid the Bud Post spiral. Lesson 1. When a windfall arrives, the first move is always to do nothing for at least 90 days. Bud spent $300,000 in 2 weeks. Most lottery advisors now recommend what they call a financial decompression period, where you park the money in something boring and liquid like a high-yield savings account or short-term treasuries, and you make zero major purchases for 3 to 6 months. Not a house, not a business, not a car, nothing. The reason is that sudden money triggers a measurable spike in impulsive decision-making, and those first weeks are when the worst choices get made. If Bud had simply done nothing for 90 days, he would have had time to hire a fiduciary financial advisor, an estate attorney, and a tax specialist before a single dollar moved. Lesson 2. Never invest in a business you don't understand, especially not with money you can't afford to lose. Bud bought a restaurant, a used car lot, and an airplane within 2 weeks. He had no experience in any of those industries. The rule of thumb that professional investors use is that you should only put money into ventures where you can clearly explain in 2 minutes how the business makes money, who the customers are, and what the main risks are. If you can't do that, you're not investing, you're gambling, and the house always wins. Lesson 3, and this might be the most important one: sudden wealth attracts predators, and the predators often look like family. Bud's brother tried to have him killed. His landlady sued him for a third of his winnings. The most dangerous threat to a windfall is rarely the stock market or a bad business deal. It's the people around you who suddenly see you as a resource rather than a person. The protection here is structural. Put the money in a trust. Get a lawyer involved before you tell anyone, including family, about the windfall. Set clear, written rules about gifts and loans before the requests start coming, because they will come. Bud Post's story is not a story about bad luck. It's a story about what happens when capability doesn't match opportunity, when emotional decisions overwhelm financial structure, and when the people closest to you become the biggest threats. He had every chance to die wealthy. He died on food stamps instead, which raises an even more uncomfortable question. If a man can lose $16.2 million in a few short years, what does that mean for the millions of ordinary people who inherit far smaller sums every year? And which inheritance horror story should we examine next?